When people imagined the end of Rome's power, they pictured barbarians forcing their way through the gates, legions scattering and disappearing, or emperors being poisoned in marble palaces. But empires do not collapse only because of external enemies. They rot from within as well. And one of the most powerful accelerators of this rapid decay has always been the power of money. Rome did not fall only because of invasions or corruption. It fell because its currency collapsed. And the lessons to be drawn from these collapses are still valid today for every modern economy that believes it can manipulate money without paying the price. First, let's set the stage. For centuries, the backbone of the Roman economy was its main currency, the silver denarius. First minted around 201 BC, this coin was almost pure silver and was trusted throughout the empire and beyond. Roman soldiers were paid with it. Merchants demanded it. Ordinary people stored their wealth in it. The silver denarius was not just money. It was trust turned into metal. The power of the empire and the value of its money were directly connected. As long as people trusted Rome, they believed its money was strong. But keeping an empire alive and standing is expensive. Legions had to be paid. Roads and aqueducts had to be built and maintained. Wars had to be financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was overstretched. Borders were being defended against Germanic tribes, wars were fought against the Parthians in the east, and internal unrest was growing. Tax revenues collected from the people were no longer enough to cover military expenses. And the emperors turned to an old trick, debasing the currency. Raising taxes always caused backlash. Rome knew this, so instead they chose to reduce the silver content of the denarius. The numbers tell the whole story. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius was about 95% silver. By the early 3rd century, under Caracalla, this dropped to around 50%. By the mid-3rd century, under Emperor Gallienus, it had fallen below 5%. What was once nearly pure metal had become a thin, silver-coated bronze disc. People saw it, and they felt it in their hands, and inflation began to explode. As money stopped being backed by real value, prices rose rapidly. Grain that once cost 1 denarius suddenly cost dozens. This was not an abstract theory. It was a disaster that destroyed the lives of ordinary Romans. Roman soldiers demanded higher wages as prices rose. Merchants refused debased coins and demanded barter or gold instead. Local economies reverted to direct barter because money was no longer trustworthy. As trust cracked, emperors minted even more worthless coins. They believed quantity could replace value. This was a cycle, and it was the same cycle repeated throughout history. The crisis peaked during what is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome endured nearly 50 years of chaos. Invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors were assassinated within months of taking the throne. Behind this political chaos was a financial system destroyed by bad decisions. Taxes were collected in increasingly worthless money. Farmers abandoned their land to avoid paying taxes. Trade networks collapsed. Rome took desperate measures to keep the system alive. Price controls, forced labor obligations. Unfortunately, none of them worked. The Romans tried to stop the bleeding under Diocletian. In AD 301, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices. It fixed prices for thousands of goods and services, from grain to wages. Those who disobeyed faced death. This too became a disaster. Low-value money itself cannot be controlled by decree. Black markets exploded. Official trade collapsed. Everyone learned the same lesson. Laws and edicts cannot turn bad money into good money. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius entirely. Around AD 312, Constantine introduced the solidus, a pure gold coin. It provided centuries of stability in the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. But for the Western Roman Empire, it was already too late. The debasement of the denarius hollowed out Rome's economic core. Economic activity stalled, armies became unsustainable, trade collapsed, and trust was gone. Rome did not fall because of a single event. It was a long unraveling, and the monetary collapse was one of its sharpest edges. So what does this mean for us today? The destruction of money is always the destruction of states and empires. Rome hoped it could deceive people with coins that looked the same but were worth less. Modern nations believe they can do the same by printing money, manipulating interest rates, or inflating away debt. But the outcome is always the same. The people pay the price, wealth disappears, trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson painfully. If we continue to ignore it, we will learn it too. History never stopped teaching after Rome. Every major inflation crisis followed the same pattern. States debased money to fund spending. The wealthy protected themselves with real assets. Ordinary people were pushed into poverty. Rome's monetary crisis was the first great example, a blueprint for collapse. By the 20th century, the echoes became clearer. After World War I, Germany faced crushing reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. The government tried to pay its debt by printing money. In 1923, hyperinflation erupted. Before the war, one loaf of bread cost 1 mark. That year, it cost 200 billion marks. People carried their wages in wheelbarrows. Retirees starved as their savings evaporated. As in Rome, debtors were saved. Owners of real assets grew stronger. Money lost meaning. And this economic destruction paved the way for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the 2000s. Land reforms, collapsing production, and debt pushed the government to print money. In 2008, inflation reached 89.7 billion% annually. Prices doubled every day. Price tags could not be replaced fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe abandoned its currency entirely. People were forced to use the US dollar and South African rand. No matter where you look, the same story, and not just in extreme cases. Even today, Rome's model lives on in modern developed economies. In 1971, US President Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard. Money was no longer backed by gold, but by trust in the state. As in Rome, spending became tempting. Debt ballooned. Money supply expanded. Inflation became permanent. What $1 bought in 1971 now costs more than $6. The money looks the same, but it has been hollowed out, just like in Rome. The game never changes. Inflation is presented as growth. Debt is sold as investment advice. Stock markets are shown as proof of prosperity. Like Roman emperors, leaders act as if nothing has changed. But they quietly drain value from every paycheck, every saving. What makes today dangerous is scale. Rome was an empire. Weimar Germany was national. Zimbabwe was local. Today, the entire world is tied to the same fiat system, massive debt, and money-printing central banks. The next collapse will not be local. It will be global. And as always, the cost will be paid not by asset-owning elites, but by wage earners, retirees, and savers. So what is the personal lesson? First, inflation is not an accident. It is a political policy. A silent tax that has destroyed empires for 2,000 years. Second, real wealth is not in paper money, but in assets that hold value when money fails. Resources, land, skills, productive businesses. Third, never assume stability is permanent. For centuries, Romans laughed at the idea their money could become worthless. In 1913, Germans could not imagine wheelbarrows of cash. In the 1980s, Zimbabwe expected prosperity. But the story always ended the same. The fall of Rome reminds us of this. Financial systems move slowly, then collapse suddenly. When money loses its link to reality, society unravels. Contracts break down. Trade stumbles. Armies fall apart. States lose legitimacy. The barbarians at the gates finish the job. But the real killer is always the treasury. And the final word is this: history does not repeat itself exactly. But if you refuse to understand it, it will crush you again. Rome's financial crisis is not just a story of bad emperors. It is a warning about how fragile power becomes when money is abused. And that fragility is still here, waiting. If this video gave you a new perspective, subscribe. History always has answers.